Hello and welcome to another update. In this one, we'll be covering the latest developments throughout the frontline, or not, because in this one, I have decided to take a different approach. I've decided that after looking through the news for almost 12 hours today, I decided nothing is happening right now. So let's take a step back and take a look at what is actually happening, because I have spent a year now saying Russia is building up for an offensive, they're going to launch an offensive. I've made multiple videos analyzing how such an offensive could take place. Yet, a year later, we've yet to see any Russian offensive. Why is that? To answer that question, I have to go back to a rant I did to one person in real life. I spent a 10-minute voice message to someone, you know him, I'll not tell who it is, talking about exactly this point. Now, this may be a long and boring introduction to what I'm going to be saying, but essentially, if we want to answer that question, we have to look at 5 people. The 5 people is the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, the Wagner leader, now recently crashed, Pregosian, the Russian Minister of Defense, Shoigu, the Russian Commander-in-Chief, Gerasimov, and the Russian former commander of the Air Force, Surovikin. Starting out with Vladimir Putin. Who is he? Putin is a man who is known for his political intrigue. If you look at military matters, there's not much there. But when it comes to political matters, he's been able to hold a firm hand on Russia for over 20 years. He is still among the highest ratings he's ever had, even after a year and a half of war. That isn't necessarily going that well. We have so much information about his political intrigue, his intrigue in historical matters, his love for the historical Russia. There's so much stuff to talk about there, but right now, that is not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about him in relation to the other soldiers. Taking a look at what he wants and what he's strong at, and then looking at how he will reach that place. We have to first go to the other people. And we'll end back with Putin again. Starting out with the person who just crashed, Pregosian. What happened to him? And to answer that question, we have to go to Shoigu. Shoigu's position is as the Minister of Defense of Russia. He has 2 interests. The first one is to stay in power. He wants his position as the Minister of Defense. The second thing is good results in this war. Why does he want good results in this war? Because he himself wants to be valued. How is he valued? He values by getting results. So essentially what we're seeing is a man who wants to stay in power and wants to get results. However, he himself has not enough military information and background and competence to actually get results. So he has to rely on other people. So he relies on other people, such as Gerasimov, Surovikin, and Pregosian. Going to Gerasimov, he is the man who is the commander-in-chief of the Russian army. He has written their whole structure, their whole doctrine about how to fight. He is the guy in charge when it comes to military matters. He's the one who says something and it's done. And he's also the man who plans everything. Everything that is planned and it goes along to military matters, it is his say. Then we have the man who is Surovikin. Who is he? He's the man who gets shit done. He is the man who Gerasimov says, do this, and Surovikin gets it done. He also has a way of getting shit done that does not correspond with what others do. What Surovikin does is that he knows how to use firepower to its utmost potential. He is the one who orchestrated the Bakhmut meat grinder, according to Pregosian. So this guy worked closely with Wagner. That moves us back to Pregosian. Pregosian, he himself is not a military guy. He is the political figurehead of Wagner, or he was. Utkin was the military figurehead of Wagner. He was the one who was training the soldiers. He was the one who was commanding the soldiers. He's the one who built Wagner as a military entity. However, he was not the strategist who made the big plan for Wagner. Wagner itself is a professional military company. It is not an army. What made it an army was Surovikin. He is the guy who knows how to run an army. So he was told, you make a meat grinder out of the city. So he made the plan to make Wagner into an army and make Bakhmut a meat grinder. Pregosian was the figurehead. He was the one to bring attention to Bakhmut, to make it all possible using political intrigue. And this is where Gorasimovs Doctrine comes in. Gerasimov is an advocate of, we do not use military to win wars, we use everything within our disposal, from political diplomatic acts to military soldiers using their own guns at the front line. So how does Gerasimov tell Surovikin to plan this? He tells him, get as much attention to the city as possible. Why? Because they are aware that Ukraine doesn't just fight for themselves. They fight for the whole West. They need a lot of PR to show Western audiences so that the West will support them further. They cannot continue this war without Western support. So they want as much attention to what is happening to the front as possible. But it has to be a mix. It has to be a part where they showcase how the Russian side is damaging Ukraine, the infrastructure and the civilians. They do not want to show that they are losing. They want to show that they are struggling at the front, but at the same time they want to show that Western help helps. So they want victories, and they want to struggle to get those victories. This brings me to an article I recently read, and it is about the Stormtrooper syndrome. The Stormtrooper syndrome is to showcase as much as possible that the quote-unquote hero, which in this case for Western audiences is Ukraine, is under as much peril as possible. They want to showcase Ukraine is struggling at 110%. And the only way they can win is with your support, with your money, and with your opinion, helping the politicians send weapons to Ukraine. Taking a look at all of this, we see that the whole plan for Bakhmut was to give Ukraine exactly what they needed for their PR goals, but then to force the Ukrainians to pay the biggest price possible for that, and that is by turning it into a meat grinder, grinding down Ukrainian forces. They took as much time as possible because they know the longer time it goes with the Ukrainians focused on Bakhmut, the less time, the less effort, the less resources, the less manpower they have to do things elsewhere. They were forcing the Ukrainians to put all of their attention at Bakhmut while the Russian army was building up their army. So the Russians have spent a year building up their army. Actually, it's essentially 10 months from October to August. They're still building it up. According to official numbers from the Russian Ministry of Defense, 300,000 partially mobilized and 250,000 volunteers. That's over 500,000 soldiers added to the ranks of the Russian forces fighting in the front line. This all at the cost of Wagner. Wagner has been sent to the rear. They do not have Wagner at the front. So in exchange for Wagner, they have added 550,000 soldiers to the Russian ranks. Now the question here is, if the Russians now are 550,000 troopers, soldiers stronger. Why is Ukraine still on the offensive and Russia on the defensive? That is because the whole idea of Russian doctrine is Maskarovka. They want to divert the attention from what is actually happening. And what is the best way to do that? Fool your friends, you fool your enemy. There is only 5 people who know the plan of the Russian army. We have Gerasimov, Surovikin, Pregosian, Shoigu, and Putin. Those are the 5 people in the whole country of Russia that knows what the Russian plan is. It does not go outside these 5 guys, and these 5 guys are in charge of everything. Everyone else in the whole army do not matter. These 5 guys are the glue and butter and everything that holds everything together in the Russian army. So why get rid of Pregosian? Why did Pregosian do all of this complaining? Why did he do the mutiny? Why was he killed? This whole thing adds up in the bigger picture. This is why we have to go through this step by step, and this is why this is going to be a very long video, so stay with me. What we are looking at is Pregosian pulled a lot of attention to Bakhmut. That is his strength. He went from an undercover guy who was basically a ghost. He comes and goes, no one knows who he is, where he is, and all of that stuff. Then suddenly he goes on camera and starts shouting. He says, "We are being used as bait, we are used as cannon fodder, we have no ammunition, we're sent here to crash." So many issues. He pinpoints this and that and that and that. He gets official documents stating we are giving you what you need, this and that and that. There's this whole drama between Pregosian and Shoigu and Gerasimov, because Gerasimov is in charge of military matters, Shoigu is in charge of political matters. This is the same as Pregosian and Utkin. Pregosian is the Shoigu of Wagner, and Utkin is the Gerasimov of Wagner. So what we are seeing is that Pregosian is doing this whole charade because what gives more attention than Western media talking about how the Russian army and Wagner are fighting against each other? The question here is, okay, somehow on the 24th of June, the Russian army somehow magically sends a missile to a Wagner camp. The Russian army says we did not do that. Pregosian starts a mutiny, takes control over Rostov, marches towards Moscow. 100 kilometers before reaching Moscow, he turns around and says, "I don't want to do this anymore." And then he gets a talk with Lukashenko and Putin. They get sent to Belarus, and that's the end of the mutiny. 2 months later, his plane crashes, he and Utkin dies. How do all of this fit into the picture? Now, there's multiple possibilities. The first one is Pregosian doing all of this, bringing all of this attention to Bakhmut. His goal was to get as much attention as possible to Bakhmut. He does it, he fulfills his job, he loses men, he loses equipment, he goes through all of this, and then he gets quote-unquote no rewards for it. Wagner doesn't get the recognition it needs, it doesn't get the medals, and so on. However, Wagner in the Russian public is now a hero, war hero. Pregosian is a war hero. He is recognized all throughout the Russian population. What does this mean? It means that now the attention goes not to Shoigu, not to Gerasimov, who orchestrated this whole thing, but instead to Pregosian, who is the figurehead, the one bringing attention to everything. So either the first possibility is that Shoigu, the man who wants 2 things, results and keeping his position, now sees that he did not get credit for the results, and he's now at risk of losing his position because Pregosian, similar to him, is also a friend of Putin's, and then he gets all of the credit. This endangers Shoigu's position. So he, out of greed and out of uncertainty for himself, his own position, decides, okay, this is dangerous for me, so he goes around Putin and decides to kill Pregosian. That is possibility number 1. The second possibility is that this is still Pregosian bringing attention to himself. And what brings more attention then the military leader, the political leader, the head of Wagner, both die in a plane crash 2 months after a mutiny. So this whole thing blows up in the Western media, breaking news everywhere. Russia has killed the Wagner leader. And then pro-Ukrainian accounts say, oh, Wagner's going to do mutiny number 2. Yet somehow there is radio silence from all Wagner channels on Telegram. Not a single one gives any official information. There's nothing. They keep saying, don't spread information because none of it is official. Only official information is here. And then all the official Wagner channels spread this exact same message. Don't share information. None of it is real. We have official information here and there's nothing out yet. So there's no official Wagner information. Why is that? That is because Wagner itself does not know what happened. What is going on? They were not informed by Pregosian. They were not informed by Utkin that this would happen. Pregosian and Utkin are crashed. They crashed. There's no more of them. Wagner now has the mission to stay together and build up their strength, make sure that they are able to defend their own interests, because it is a separate military company from Russia. However, in the second scenario, this was all planned by Pregosian. As I mentioned earlier, this whole Russian plan is known by 5 people, and they do not share it outside of these 5 people. So if Pregosian randomly crashes, that makes it 4 people. But in reality, Pregosian orchestrates this again to buy attention. Why is he doing the biggest attention-catching thing? Or actually the second biggest, because the biggest would be him returning at this point in time. Ukraine's offensive is reaching its final stage. They're going to be doing a main push on Russian defensive line. This is the moment of truth of the Ukrainian offensive. Will they be able to break through the Russian main defensive line, or will they not be able to? This is the perfect moment to take all of the attention away from that and put it on Pregosian. Because now the Ukrainians are thinking, we failed in Bakhmut, we failed at it, we are now failing our offensive. We need to get some results. At the very least, they want to get Tokmak, because at that point they can say we are halfway there. However, right now they haven't broken through the first main defensive line of the Russian forces. So with Pregosian continuously taking away the attention, he's not at the front, so how can he take away attention? By suddenly crashing. What has Russia done during this attention-grabbing time? They have built up an army. Is that army finished now? I would say with 550,000 new soldiers added to the ranks, Russia is now able and capable and ready to launch their own offensive. So why have they not done it? What are they waiting for? They are waiting for the perfect time at which no one knows what they're doing. They are sending troops everywhere, constantly moving them around, to the point that even at the smallest rumor of Russian forces moving somewhere, because Ukraine knows that Russia has built up this huge army, but they do not know when, where, or how, and so on, they will strike. So with the slightest rumor of Russian troops being somewhere, Zelensky goes around and switches around the positions of his own forces. He sends territorial defense at the front everywhere, and he has reinforced brigades set around the country to rapidly respond in case of a Russian incursion. We've seen deep reconnaissance groups of Russian forces all the way from Kiev and down to Kharkov in the border between Russia and Ukraine and Belarus and Ukraine. We see all of this happening constantly. And in the end, there's no action. We've seen this all the way back to January until now, and there's no action by the border. Why are they doing this? Again, to confuse Ukraine. They want to give zero information about their offensive. How do they do that? By having no plan. So the point I was getting at is Russia has no plan outside of these 5 people. All the other generals, all the other leaders, all of the other units do not know what the plan is. None of them do. Their information is hold the line. Everything else that happens is at their discretion. The Uledar offensive, the Kupiansk offensive, the Kreminna front, all of this is at the local commander's own discretion. They choose what they do. The only command they have is hold the line, and the reason for that is when the command comes that they are to launch an offensive, they are ready for it. They do not know when, where, how, and none of that. They just know it will come one day, just like everyone else. As long as a country is at war, at some point they will launch an offensive. So, while all of this is happening, the Russians are constantly on the defensive, all the way from August of last year to August now. A year has passed by, and the only thing Russia has done is build up their troops and hold the line. Wagner did an offensive in Bakhmut, and local commanders have done minor incursions into Ukrainian territory, but there's been no coordinated offensive. Now, the main arguments against this is 1. Russia is incapable of it, and 2. Russia cannot command and organize such a large force. The first one is bogus, because we know the partial mobilization happened, and we know there's a 250,000 strong volunteer grouping that they have trained and sent to the front. That's 550,000 additional troops. Comparing that with what Russia had at the start of the war, where they did launch a coordinated attack across the whole front, this is significantly more. And then the second question, Russia is incapable of organizing such a large force. That is also bogus, and the reason for that is Russia now has a year and a half of experience, and historically speaking, countries with zero experience have been able to coordinate larger armies. They didn't do it well, but they still did it. And if you know that you can do it, you do not know how well you can, but you know you can, then you will do it. We have seen smaller commanders take bigger risks, yet they fail completely, but they still do it again. Why would the Russian army not take a risk at doing this if they know that as long as they stay on the defensive, they'll just continue this war? They know that although war requires casualties, there's no war without casualties. No one ever started a war saying, we will take 0 casualties. That has never happened. Even if we take a look at World War II, that is the last major battle that included major countries and huge armies at the scale of millions and was on a very large front, all of Europe, all of these things. Based on that, we see the most successful countries in World War II took hundreds of thousands of casualties. So Russia refusing to launch an offensive because it'll take casualties, that's bogus. 100% they are willing to take it. There's no question about it. They just want to do it when they are sure it will succeed. You can never be 100% sure, but they have a margin that they want to stay inside of. Whether it be 90% or 50%, whichever it is. They want to be that sure, and then they will launch it. So they want to take all the things that add together that increases the possibility. One of them is Maskarovka, trying to confuse the enemy. The second one is having a large army. The third one is decreasing the enemy's army. The fourth one is to gather information. The fifth one, so on. So there's so many different factors. They want as many as possible to align. And one of them is Ukraine's morale. Currently, the Ukrainians have spent 8 months since their last success. They haven't had any major success since the end of the Battle of Kherson. For this whole time, they have been fighting across the front. They've had minor successes around, but they haven't had any major ones. Bakhmut was a 6 months long battle from December all the way to May. In this whole period of time, there was a huge attrition, and in the end, Ukraine lost Bakhmut. They claim the battle is ongoing because they are attacking the flanks, but after 3 months of fighting, they have failed to capture Klishchiivka. After 3 months of fighting, they have finally captured Robotyne. This offensive, compared to what it was advertised to be, compared to what everyone was expecting, including Ukrainian soldiers on the front, it is going terribly. And all of this has a huge toll on Ukrainian morale. Just imagine that every time they launch a new convoy towards Robotyne, they have to go through 4 to 5 graveyards of Western equipment. The thing that they have advertised for months, that as soon as they get these, they'll win. They'll push to the SFC. Yet somehow, they have managed to capture one village in the Odehiv sector after 3 months of fighting. So seeing them by the front, when they have to go through these graveyards to reach the front, that has a hit on their morale. On top of them only advancing these 10 kilometers after 3 months of fighting. 10 kilometers of depth. So with all of this, we end up with the conclusion that Putin, the political intrigue history guy, the one thing he has in interest is that he comes out of this war with a better rating than prior to it. And he gets to it in a way where he has as much control over the country as possible, and that if we believe that he has an interest in bettering Russia as a geopolitical player and for a better potential in the future, for example, holding a better borderland that allows them, even if they have the population decline, even if they get weaker, that they still are able to defend themselves. If that is his plan as well, then what he wants, the interest he has, is winning this war. And by how does a political leader that has no military function, how does he win a war? He does so by trusting the right man. And is he trusting the right men by trusting these 4 military guys, who half of them are not military guys? So far, it seems that although the Russians have lost territory constantly since October of last year, since August of last year actually, the Russian army today is much stronger than it was back then, and they have shown that they're able to defend. The next thing they need to show is that they're able to attack. So what we're waiting for is that one day the Russian leadership, military and political, take the decision. Today we launch our offensive, and today the war will end. Whether or not it'll succeed, all of these things, this whole video is speculation. I'll give you that. You can complain all you want in the comments. And I believe this video will probably do terribly compared to the rest of mine. But I had to get this out of my chest. This whole situation, it makes no sense, because the whole Russian strategy is that no one knows what is happening except for these 5 people. So the reality of the situation is known amongst these 5 people. So hey, hopefully my wish is that one day I get to interview one of these guys just to go through all of this shit, because I really want to know what the hell was planned here. That is going to be all for this video. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.